So I think we can start the talk. So, hello everyone. Thanks for joining in today. We have Amod Zambre as our guest speaker today. Amod is a PhD student from University of Minnesota. Amod's research interest lies in studying the sexual science and animal behaviors, evolution, scorpions, and herpetology. Today, he is going to talk about the mechanisms that mediate the evolution of colorful dewlaps in fan-throated lizards and how Indian reptiles and amphibians can be excellent model systems to test fundamental questions in ecology, evolution, and behavior. So I hand over the platform to you, Amod. For the audience, I would suggest if you have any questions, please wait till the end, where we will have our question and answer session. So over to you, Amod.
Excellent. Thank you, Apurv. Can everyone see the slides?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So, firstly, I definitely need to thank everyone for being here on a Sunday. Being the lazy person that I am, I usually would be in bed by now on a Sunday. So clearly, it seems like we have a bunch of really interested people wanting to listen to what I will try not to make a dry talk of some work that I have done. So I've kind of given a slightly provocative title, Beyond Taxonomy. This is by no means to minimize the impact of taxonomy on Indian herpetology. But the proposition that I really want to make is that now that we have taxonomy sort of in place, maybe it's time to look beyond taxonomy and look at what are the other awesome opportunities reptiles and amphibians or herpetofauna offer us. By us, I mean it can be biologists, researchers, amateur naturalists, students, whoever. And to do that, I think what I'm going to start by doing is briefly tell you the kind of work that I do, and then maybe spend another 10 minutes discussing how, given the awesome diversity that we have in India, as far as reptiles and amphibians is concerned, how we can leverage that diversity to ask some really interesting questions. Okay, a little bit about me. I am a fifth-year PhD student in the Department of Ecology, Evolution, and Behavior at the University of Minnesota. And before moving to Minnesota, I grew up in Pune. Like I've told lots of people in the past, I'm a Pakka Puneri, and I did my undergrad in Garware College, and then I moved to NCBS to get a master's in wildlife biology. Then I worked at the Indian Institute of Science for 3 years, and then I moved to Minnesota. So that's kind of a little bit about me. Okay, so while I was making this presentation, I did a quick Google search and looked at the number of new species of reptiles and amphibians that were described in the last couple of years. And I've just took their photos and put them here. Okay, this list by no means is an exhaustive list. So I'm sure there are many more species that have been described in the last couple of years. The point that I'm trying to make here is that Indian herpetofauna is super diverse. Okay, and we have an extremely dedicated, vibrant community of reptile and amphibian taxonomists who have been doing a fabulous job of telling us what really exists there. Okay, and the fact that a quick Google search throws up whatever 6 or 8 new species in the last couple of years from India tells us how awesome India is as far as reptiles and amphibians are concerned. Just to give you an example, where I live in Minnesota, if I have to make a list of common amphibians and reptiles, the list is around 13 species. You find more than that in Pune, whatever locality you take, right? So we are blessed with an awesome diversity. And now that the taxonomists have done their job and told us what's out there, I think it's our job to take things beyond just knowing what species they are. Knowing what species exist is definitely the first step and is an important step for conservation. But to really achieve conservation effectively, we need to know a little bit more about the species than just the fact that they exist. What we need to really know about is their ecology, where they live, how they live, what they eat, right? Their behavior, how do they interact with each other, how do they escape predators, right? And another thing that we need to know is how did these species come to be? Who are they related to? What is their closest relative species? Tomorrow, if another one of these species is endangered and we really need to do some captive breeding, are there species who we can use to help with captive breeding, right? Those questions. So my proposition is that now that we know taxonomy, it's time to move on, not just simply because we need to know more about these species, which is going to be helpful in conservation, but because these species can function as excellent model systems to test fundamental principles in ecology, evolution, and behavior. So let me just give you one example. The reason we are having a Zoom call right now is because we are all in a lockdown, maybe not a formal one, but an informal one. We can't travel the way we used to travel. And that's because of coronavirus. And we are all desperately waiting for a vaccine, a coronavirus vaccine. And one of the forerunners for that vaccine is that AstraZeneca and Oxford vaccine. Now it's in the third stage trial, and we are all waiting for it. Serum Institute is going to probably manufacture it. But the reason I brought this up is because before they even thought that that vaccine was useful and promising, they actually used monkeys as a model system to test whether if you inject that vaccine, are they producing antibodies. So that is what I mean by a model system. You can use an animal to do your initial testing, and that system can serve as a good model to understand how it might affect the broader context. So for example, with the monkey example, once we test it on monkeys, we know how it will respond to, as in how that vaccine might affect humans, right? In similar ways, reptiles and amphibians can help us by studying them, can give us a better idea of how other animals, other ecosystems have actually assembled, how have they evolved, and why do they show certain behaviors that they show. And today I'm going to talk about the model system that I am really passionate about and work on, which is the fan-throated lizards, and how I'm using this system to answer some fundamental questions in evolution and behavior. But before I get to my specific questions, I really want to step back and tell you what is driving my research. So I am fascinated by the bright and conspicuous flamboyant colors that you see in nature. And interestingly, you see it across species. So you see colorful birds, you see colorful fish, butterflies, monkeys, spiders, lizards. So pretty much every group of animal that you take, you will find animals which are extremely colorful. And I am really interested in understanding, firstly, why are animals so colorful? And what is the function that these colors play? Now, I am not the only one who is really interested in understanding animal coloration. Okay, this has been a topic and a question that many different biologists for many years have been interested in. If I just want to give you an example of how long people have been interested in this topic, we just need to go back and look at what Charles Darwin wrote about these colors. Okay, so I hope everyone has has heard about Charles Darwin. He is considered the father of the field of evolution. So he was really interested in understanding how do new species come to be. Okay, and his whole idea was that every time there is either a change in the environment or the habitat the animal is living in, or the animal is moving from one habitat to a new one, there are changes in conditions that influence if the animal survives or dies. Okay, so if the animal really has to survive in that habitat, it has to adapt to the new habitat. And it has to undergo this adaptation either in its behavior or in its morphology. For example, if you see an animal moves from a habitat where it's eating leaves to a habitat where leaves aren't available and it has to eat fruits, it has to undergo changes in its gut, it has to undergo changes in its mouth. And when they undergo this process of adaptation, they evolve into new species. And based on this general concept, later on this term survival of the fittest was coined. What it means is when animals move to a new environment, the only ones which are fittest, either by undergoing the process of adaptation or just by chance, that they just happen to have a trait that helps them, they survive, they reproduce, and they evolve. Okay. And he wrote his really influential book, The Origin of Species, based on this argument. And when he was thinking about it, colorful animal posed a kind of a challenge to his theory. And the reason for that is, remember I told you about the survival of fittest. So the idea is to survive. And one of the biggest challenges that the animals face in a environment is the risk of predation, that they are going to get eaten up, right? And animals do lots of different things not to get eaten up. One of them is developing certain colors that allow them to blend with the environment, the process that we very commonly call camouflage. So if an animal in a green forest where there are lots of leaves and grass is green, it can potentially avoid predators by not being bright. Or if it's in a desert, they'll look brown. But then why are these certain animals colorful? Because that is actually making them a lot more conspicuous to predators, right? So it didn't kind of fit his theory of evolution in some sense, or it didn't fit. Rather than that, it posed an interesting challenge to that theory. So he really thought about it, and he actually ended up writing a second book, which may not be as popular as his first book or well known, but it's equally, if not more, influential in understanding ecology, evolution, and behavior. Okay, and in that book, that book was totally focused on understanding why some animals are colorful. Okay, and he came up with an interesting theory. He said, well, colors may not help animals survive, but there is a chance that they help them reproduce, because survival and reproduction are two fundamental things that animals are striving for, and those are the two factors that influence how animals evolve. Okay, so his argument was that, well, bright colors might end up getting you eaten, but they also might increase the chances of reproduction. So, and he came up with this argument because what he found was, typically it was the males that were more brighter than the females. Females were usually dull in color and were better at camouflaging, while it was these males that ended up producing these bright colors. So his idea was that, like, when we look at like either other individuals and decide if they are attractive or not based on whatever, how well they are built, or what color is their skin color, or what's their hair, or what is their eye color. Similarly, animals do the same. And females might look at a male and use these colors to decide if they are attractive or not, and then use those colors to decide if they want to reproduce with them or not. Okay. Now, if we fast forward around 100 years and a lot of research later, this concept of colors being used as for mating related decisions got formalized in this concept called sexual signals. Okay, instead of simply calling them attractive, a female finds them attractive, what we know now is these colors actually encode information about the quality of the individual. Okay, and females, and in many cases even other rival males, use this information to decide either if they want to fight with that male or if they want to mate with that male. Okay, so let me give you an example. My favorite lizard, assume that the fan under the throat, which is called a dewlap, so remember this word because I'm going to keep using this word, has three colors. And let's say the orange color is correlated to how good the individual's genes are. And certain genes allow you to be better at tolerating cold or heat, or some of them help you hold a better territory, whatever. So that orange color is related to some underlying quality of the individuals. So this one particular male is showing off the orange color and trying to tell the female, okay, hey, I have good genes, come mate with me. Okay, the females is looking at multiple males and then looking at their color is deciding, okay, is this better, or is that better? And then she's deciding if she wants to mate with that male or not. Additionally, surprisingly, this lizard also uses colors to communicate with males. Let's say, for example, it's using that black color. Okay, and the black color is correlated to some underlying trait, like say testosterone concentration. And we know from many studies that greater the testosterone, better the male is at fighting and better the male is at holding a territory. Okay. So by showing off the black color, the male might be telling other rival males who is going to fight with that, look, I am big and aggressive, so don't mess with me. Okay. So what I'm trying to say is that those colors are actually letting that particular individual advertise his body condition, which is going to be useful for it to fend off rival males or attract females. Okay, so that is why these colors are often termed as sexual signals. Reason for sexual signals is because it's used for in the context of sexual reproduction, and signals because it's transmitting information. Okay, so we can say that at least in the context of this lizard, the dewlap color and the flagging behavior is a sexual signal. Okay, so that brings me to what is it that I actually do. So I am, like I said, I'm fascinated by the colors. Okay, and I find that lizards can be an awesome system to study how colors have evolved, why these sexual signals have evolved. Because if you look at this image, you see there are some lizards which have absolutely no color. Okay, you have some lizards which have 3 colors, and you have all kinds of permutation and combinations and variation. Okay, so I am interested in understanding what are the factors that are resulting in some lizards being extremely dull in color and some lizards being extremely bright in colors, right? So I'm interested in what has led to this diversity in the visual sexual signals. So I'm going to stress on the visual part here, because animals can use, in addition to color, animals can use pheromones, animals can use sounds, animals can use vibrations, animals can use many different kinds of ways of communicating with each other in the context of mating. Okay, so if it's a call that animals are using, like birds singing a song, that will be called an acoustic sexual signal. My work focuses on colors and that therefore on visual sexual signals. So that is what I am interested in. Okay, so I showed you the differences in the dewlap color, but let me show you how they actually use this dewlap, because that is also an important component of how they are communicating with males and females in the context of mating. So here is a lizard called Sarada darwini, and you can see a male that is displaying. Okay, so what it's doing is it's using its colorful dewlap and flagging it. Okay, so that's how they show off their color. So how fast they flag their dewlap, okay, how large is the dewlap color, uh, and what is the color of their dewlap are 3 important characters that determine how good their sexual signal is. And I am really interested in looking at different species and understanding why are there differences in their color and their behavior, and what are the factors that are influencing these differences. Okay, so okay, this is just another reason to justify why I am interested in lizards and why they can be really useful model systems to study evolution of sexual signals. So in India, you at least find, well, when I last checked, there were around 15 different species of these lizards, and they are found pretty much all across India. So if you see, this is a map. This map shows you that they are found all the way from Tarai, which is Nepal border, to Kanyakumari. Okay, they're also found in Sri Lanka, some in Pakistan, but they are typically a Indian species. And secondly, where they are found, they are extremely common. So when you're doing research on ecology or behavior, unlike taxonomy where finding a few species is sufficient, few individuals, here you really need to get access to multiple number of individuals so that you can study them in detail. Studying just 1 or 2 individuals doesn't really help understand these questions. So they are common, they are widespread, they are extremely diverse. Like I said, 15 different species. And there is a great variation in their sexual signals, which is the color and the size and the behavior. Okay. And another addition was that their phylogeny is resolved. When I mean by their phylogeny is resolved, I mean that we know exactly how each of these species is related to each other. Who is more related to each other? So this phylogeny is nothing but a family tree of these lizards. So you know who the grandparents are, you know who are the first cousins, you know who are the second cousins. And by knowing that, you can kind of understand why certain individuals look similar or different. Is it simply because they are related, or is it because of some other things? Okay. Uh, is everyone okay so far? As in, if you have doubts or questions, I'm actually more than happy to kind of answer them as we go.
I
Okay.
have a question for you, Mihir
Yes.
here.
Hi, Mihir.
Hello. You mentioned earlier in the Serta Darwini, the
Yeah.
orange color represents the how strong that gene is, right?
Yeah, I know, just an example, a hypothetical example. Yeah, but go ahead.
Yeah. Uh, so in some lizards, I've seen that the orange color extends right up to the vent. So what does that signify?
Oh, so where a color is expressed on the body is a completely different question from what the color functions as. Okay. Uh, so when we are talking about where the color is on the body, that is determined by, firstly, what is the function of that color. So for example, one can ask, why is the back of the lizard brown and not orange, right? And why is
Yeah.
only the belly orange, right? And there can be several explanations to this, and I'm going to be sort of going through them. But very quickly, I can tell you it depends on the function and the selection pressure. Okay.
Okay.
And in case of lizards, for example, I will kind of say that the orange is not on the back and it's on the belly, because if you continuously keep orange on the back, you're going to be more visible to predators. And so you'll be picked up. If the orange is on the belly, you can stand up and show the orange when you want, and you don't necessarily have to be exposed to predators all the time. Right?
Yeah.
That can
Right.
be one potential explanation. Right? So by having the bright colors that allow you to signal and get mates, and you and avoiding predator, it's kind of a balance, right? And I'll talk more about it, but that's kind of why I think, say for example, why certain colors are in certain places, and there is a fair bit of work on those kinds of things as well.
Okay.
Does that
Thanks.
answer your question, or do you think I should?
Yeah. No problem. Yeah, I've got my answer.
Okay, cool. So should we move on? Cool. Okay, so since, remember I told you that there is, people have been interested in something like this for many years, so more than 100 years. So, and lots of people have done some spectacular work, and we now have the foundation to ask bigger questions. What we know from that old research is a couple of things. That very broadly, there are certain factors that influence how sexual signals evolve. Okay, and one of the biggest one is female and male preferences. Okay, now remember I told you that animals are using these signals to communicate with males and females uh, in the context of mating. So you need to use colors that those prefer and whose the information that they are encoding can be easily understood by the males and females. So let me give you an example. If you really need to tell someone who is walking on the road that don't go straight, there is a ditch there, you will fall down. You need to tell that person in a language that he understands, he or she understands. Okay, if it's someone like me who is a Puneri Ghati, and you tell me, oh, there is a ditch in front, don't go, in Spanish, I'm not going to understand anything, right? So that communication is going to fail. In the same way, animals need to use colors that the other males and females can see, and they can understand what information those colors are signaling. Okay, so if you use colors that they don't really like or understand, the communication is going to fail. So you're not going to get a chance to meet, right? So there is an immense amount of pressure on the individuals who are signaling to use colors that the males and the females like. So in the case of the lizards, the male lizard has to use colors that the females like, and the colors that the males understand, so that the males can stay away and the females can be attracted. So that's one of the very important factors that influences what colors animals use as sexual signals. The second one is predation. Now, Mihir came up with a very interesting question, and this is where this is the other thing that can explain why certain colors exist and where they exist. So this kind of takes us back to what Darwin was struggling with. If you are bright, you're going to attract predators and get eaten up. But if you're not bright, it's likely that the females will not choose you for mating, right? So animals who are signaling need to balance these two things. Okay. So let's say in the case of the lizard, orange is great for attracting females. So if a male decides that he wants to be all orange, okay, he'll definitely attract females, but there is a chance that before he gets a chance to mate, he'll be picked up by some bird and get eaten up. Okay, so while he might be extremely attractive, he may not get a chance to mate. Okay, so they need to balance this. So animals do that in different ways. Okay, they can do that by deciding when they want to signal. So in the case of setanas, let's say they are eaten up by diurnal birds of prey. Okay, setanas, one choice might be that, oh, I will signal only during night. Okay, but the problem is that you can't see things at night. So how am I going to be doing it? I won't really get any meetings. And the second thing is, oh, I can kind of be attractive only to females while not being attractive to other predators. So by doing that, I'll just leave the orange on my belly and just show it off when I want. And when there's a predator, I'll just hide my orange and only expose my brown so I get camouflaged, right? So predation can also determine what kind of colors are used and how they are used. So they are another important factor that influences how signals evolve. The third one is a kind of an interesting one. Okay, it is interspecific interactions. What I mean by interspecific interactions is interactions between two different species. Now, remember that species don't live in a habitat all alone. There are often many different species cohabiting together. Now, sometimes, as it may happen, that two very closely related species might come together, and they might, because they are closely related, let's say cousins, they have very similar sexual signals that they are using. Okay, and what this might result in is a confusion between the two. Okay, so there might be a possibility that male of species A is signaling, and males of species B thinks that it's the same male of its own species. So they start fighting. Now, this is very unnecessary fighting. And the reason for that is there is no point in fighting with some other male who is from a different species for access to mating. Because you don't want access to different species female. You want access to females of your own species, right? If you mate with females of other species, what is going to happen is either you're not going to produce babies, okay, or even if you produce babies, the babies are going to be really weak, of poor quality. Okay, so you, at least in the context of mating, you don't want any fighting or any meetings with other species. You just want to do that with males of your own species and females of your own species. So what happens sometimes is when there is such cross-species interactions, to avoid that confusion, sometimes there are changes in sexual signals that happen. And these changes in sexual signals allow you to reduce that fight. So for example, if you have two lizards, both of which are using orange, then there is going to be a confusion. Okay, so over time, what happens is one of the species tends to change its signal so that there is no confusion. Okay, now this is kind of a rare or a unique or a special case. Okay, but I've kind of put it here because I'm going to focus on these three factors and tell you how these three factors have affected the evolution of fan-throated lizard signals. There are many other factors that also contribute to evolution of sexual signals. They can be parasites, they can be competition between males of the same species, and more importantly, there is also environmental factors like light, habitat complexity that also affects evolution of affect evolution of sexual signals. Today, I'm not going to talk about those factors, but if people are interested, I'm more than happy to discuss the work that I have done looking at how those factors influence the sexual signals. Okay, so let's start with the first one, which is, so like I said, I'm going to focus on these three factors and I'm going to talk to you about these three questions that I have. First one, how do male and female preferences influence the dewlap colors of Sarda superba. Okay. So to look at how preferences affect evolution of color, I'm focusing on this one species called Sarda superba. Second one, I'm going to discuss how predation influences sexual signals of Sarda superba. And thirdly, I'm going to look at what role do interspecific interactions play in shaping signaling behavior of two other species, Sarda darwini and Sitana lattice. Okay. And now I'm going to go through each of them briefly and tell you what is the question that I'm interested in, how I did that work, and what is it that we found. Okay, so let's go to the first one. How do male and female preferences influence evolution of Sarda superba? Okay, now Sarda superba is a really interesting species. It's called superba because it is one of the biggest fan-throated lizards in India. It also has one of the biggest dewlap. It has the biggest throat fan of all the fan-throated lizards. Also, it's extremely colorful. Now, this species is kind of endemic to the endemic to the Charkewadi plateau, which is close to Satara, and in this area, it's found in really large numbers. So it's a lovely model system. So what we were really interested in knowing is why is it that Sitana superba has 3 colors on its dewlap? What is the use of having a blue, black, and orange dewlap? Why doesn't it have a single one? Why doesn't it have either black or orange, right? And we did some literature review and found that one of the reasons why animals can use multiple colors as sexual signals is if they are signaling to multiple different receivers. Okay. So in the case of Sarda superba, based on our behavior, we knew that it's using dewlap flagging, which is the throat flagging, to both communicate with females as well as communicate with males. So we wanted to test this idea that the reason they have different colors is because probably males and females have different preferences. Okay. Now, how does one test that? Okay. So if you really want to test it, what you would like to do is find Sitanas which have only blue color, only black color, and only orange color, and then see how males and females are responding to individuals which have dewlaps of like one single color. Okay. Now this is really hard to do, right? You can't really find individuals. You can find some variation in the amount of blue and orange, but you can't necessarily find individuals which are completely blue or completely orange or completely black. So what we did was we actually made robots. Okay, we made a robot that looked exactly like a male Sitana, and because we had a robot that behaved like Sitana, which is it flagged its dewlap, we could then go and change the color of the dewlap and then give males and females a choice. Say, hey, if I give you a choice between a full black dewlap and a full orange dewlap, or if I give you a choice between a blue dewlap and a black dewlap, how would you respond? Okay. And then by looking at what the males and females are doing, we figured out what their preference is. Okay. So in total, we gave lizards 3 different choices, as in we gave them 6 choices, but in 3 different trials. Okay. The first trial was males and females were given a choice between black and orange. The second, we gave them a choice between blue and black. And the third, we gave them a choice between blue and orange. And then we looked at how males respond and how females respond. Okay, so this is what our robot looked like. Okay, so this is the robot. This is the female. And we looked at so this is just one robot. What we did was we put the female in a glass tank in the center. And then on 2 sides, we gave female a choice between 2 different robots with 2 different dewlap colors. Okay, and then looked at who is the female attracted to, whose side is she planning to go. Okay, if she is attracted towards one of them, she kind of turns her head and tries to go that side. So this is a small clip of that. Okay, so you can see the female slowly turning towards it. And if I had a longer video, you can see the female is trying to scratch on the glass and go towards the male. And before we did this experiment in the lab, what we actually did was we took these robots to the field, okay, on the Charkewadi plateau, and put it out there and saw if males and females are responding. So when we did that, we actually found that males are actually getting attracted to this. They're coming and trying to bite them. Okay, so we knew that this robot worked in the field, and then we ended up using it in the lab. Okay, so okay, so after we did that, and we did that for multiple individuals, it's not like we used just one female and one male. For every trial, we used at least 20 males and 20 females. Okay, and then we looked at all their choices and saw if there is a dominant choice, and we found something very interesting. What we found was when we gave males choices between blue and orange or black and orange, we found that males consistently responded to blues and blacks. Okay, but when we gave them a choice between blue and black, there was no clear choice. Okay, but what we definitely figured out is that males have a bias towards blues and blacks. Okay, on the other side, what we found was females consistently responded only to orange. So when females were given a choice between blue and orange and black and orange, they only chose orange. Okay, so what we found was very interesting, that there was a sex specific difference between preference for colors. Okay, and we think that this is the reason why Sarda superba needs to use 3 colors, because males and females respond to different colors, and that might be because these different colors are encoding different kinds of information. So maybe orange is telling females about certain underlying qualities that the female is interested in, while the blue and black is encoding different information that the males are interested in. Okay, and that is why probably Sarda superba has to use 3 colors. Okay, so kind of the take-home message from this experiment was that because of differences in male and female preferences, Sarda superba have evolved a tricolored dewlap, or have 3 colors on the dewlap. Now, this is just first part of our experiment, and we are trying to extend it to other species, because we know that then why is it that some species, like the one I showed you in the photo, have white dewlaps? What are the males and females doing in that case, right? But as a starting point, this was really interesting. Okay, let's move to the second one. How does predation influence sexual signals of Sarda superba? I told you about the trade-off that there is between how bright you can be, how you can signal, and the cost that it brings through predation. Okay, so we really wanted to see how predation influences sexual signaling. Now, there is another problem here. How does one manipulate amount of predation, right? You can't add more birds to a habitat and see how individuals are behaving. You can't even bring them to the lab and study this, right? This was kind of an interesting problem, but we also had an interesting opportunity. While we were working on the previous experiment that looked at evolution, why do these lizards have 3 dewlaps, we were working in a place called Chaikewadi. And Chaikewadi is one of the largest wind farms in India, also one of the oldest ones. It's been around for 20 years or so, and it's huge. Okay, and there have been lots of interesting reports coming in which showed that when there are wind turbines, these wind turbines result in either large-scale mortality of birds of prey, or they reduce the activity pattern and abundance of birds of prey. Okay, so in areas where you have wind turbines, birds of prey are lower. And since setanas display during the day, birds of prey are one of the biggest predators for these lizards. Okay, and we have had several incidences when we were working there, where we found white-eyed buzzard and black-shouldered kite coming and trying to catch setanas in areas where there weren't wind turbines. Okay, but where there were wind turbines, birds couldn't come in, right? So what this gave us was an interesting opportunity, where we had areas next to each other with wind turbines and without wind turbines. And in one area where there were wind turbines, there was no predation, right? In other area, there were no wind turbines and there was predation. And by comparing this, we thought we could understand how predation actually influences evolution of sexual signaling behavior, right? Now, this is just a old Google Earth image of the plateau. And what you see here in the red are the sites that have wind turbines, and the polygons in the green are the sites that don't have wind turbines. So you can see they are really close to each other. Okay, and this is kind of advantageous for some study like ours, because sexual signals are also very sensitive to many environmental conditions. Okay, but if they are next to each other, it's more likely than not that they have very similar environments. So what we had was this lovely natural experiment where everything else was similar except for predation, right? And that gave us a chance to really look at how predation influences sexual selection. So how did we go ahead? Once we had this lovely system, how do you actually quantitatively measure sexual signaling? Okay, so Sitana's ecology actually gave us an advantage. So male Sitanas during the breeding season find these large rocks or boulders and perch on them. Okay, and they use area around that rock as their home territory. Okay, and anyone who comes inside this territory, if it's a female, they try and court her and attract her. And if it's a male, they kind of fight with them, okay, and drive them away. And interestingly, these territories are extremely stable. Once they decide where they are going to start displaying and they find their rock and they find their territory, establish their territory, they don't move away from that territory until the end of the season. Okay, so we could actually go back and look at how that same individual is responding to rival males or females. So what we did was we actually caught a bunch of males and bunch of females, put them in a glass box, and introduced first other males in the territory and looked at how this resident male responded. And once that experiment was over, after a while, we introduced another female and looked at how this territorial male was responding. And we took videos of this, and from these videos, then we could extract data about sexual signaling. Then we caught the male, measured the color, measured the dewlap size, and we already had the behavior. Okay. Just to give you, this is what one of our trials looked like. The reason we put individuals, so the individuals in the glass box is the individual we caught, put in the glass box, and then
Hello.
that individual. Hold on.
I'm sorry, the audio of the video is on. We cannot hear you properly.
Oh, sorry. So the individual in the glass box is the individual that we caught and introduced experimentally into the territory. And the one outside is the resident male who is holding that territory. Okay. And the reason we actually put the individual in a box is to avoid physical contact, because these lizards are extremely aggressive. And if you don't put the individuals in a glass box, they will fight and more often than not cause serious injuries and even death, right? So we didn't want that to happen. So we put it in a glass box where the other individual could see and still respond. So this is what one of our trials looks like. Okay, this is a male-male trial. Okay, a female trial, they don't really come close to the box and try to bite it. They usually go and display and then slowly approach it. Okay, so again, we did this number of times across areas with wind turbines and without wind turbines. Okay, and then compared the behavior. So we found that in areas with wind turbines where there was no predation, we found firstly, males were a lot more aggressive. Okay, so when we introduced a male into that territory, they have two options. Either they can display or they can directly attack. And in areas with wind turbines where there were no predators, they chose to attack and not display. Okay. Secondly, when they were displaying, okay, their displays were a lot more intense. What I mean by intense is the rate at which they were flagging their dewlap was a lot more faster than individuals who were in areas without wind turbines. And lastly, and very interestingly, we also found that individuals that were in areas with wind turbines had duller colors. Okay, they had blue, black, and orange, but those colors were relatively duller compared to the individuals who were in areas without wind turbines. Okay, so what we figured out was predation influences signaling behavior in three key ways. Firstly, it alters the dewlap colors, the intensity of the colors. It changes the intensity at which they display, and it alters how they display. Okay, and if we think back about what predation does, predation increases the risk of being eaten up while you are displaying. once you have that risk removed, individuals can actually spend more time displaying, okay, because there is no risk that you're going to be eaten. So you can go on, okay. But there is also a flip side. When you are not getting eaten, the number of individuals who you have to compete with increases, because predation is one of the biggest reasons that keeps population in check, okay. When you don't have that check, population grows. So you are competing with many more individuals for the same resource. And what that results in is you need to be more aggressive, right? So that is what might explain responses, why they were more aggressive. Now, color is a very interesting thing, and we have really thought about a long time why predation should actually lead to reduction in color intensity. Because you would expect that if I have no predation, I should basically be as bright as possible and attract as many females as possible, right? But what's happening also is there are two possible things. Firstly, usually when there is predation, the individuals that get eaten up are the weaker individuals, and weaker individuals always have duller colors. Okay, at least in this system, lizards which are smaller, not very heavy as in terms of mass, are not well fed, are usually have duller colors. So since these individuals are surviving, the population wise, the colors are duller. Secondly, the possibility is that these colors also depend on how much food you get, especially orange, because these animals, lizards, cannot produce orange. They have to get it from the insects that they eat. Okay. Since now there are many more individuals in that area, the food that each individual gets is likely to be smaller. Okay. And because it's smaller, the colors might be duller. Now, we are not exactly sure which one of these is really responsible for it, or is it a combination of both? But it's quite interesting to see that how predation is actually influencing this. Okay. Is everyone good so far? Anyone has any questions? No? So can I move to the last part? Okay. Now this is by far one of my favorite lizard projects that I've done in the last few. So this is where I tested how interspecific interactions, which is interactions between two different species, can shape evolution of signals. Okay. So most of these places, if you remember that old map that I showed you in the introduction, where different lizards are distributed, usually in a location, you only find one kind of fan-throated lizard. Okay. Now there is an exception to this though. In areas where the Western Ghat mountain meets the Deccan Plateau, there are places where two different lizards actually overlap in a very narrow belt, in a very narrow geographic region. Here, you can have species that are typically from the Deccan Plateau and species that are typically from the Western Ghat coming together. Okay. And in this place, you have very interesting interactions between different species. Okay. Now, remember I showed you that phylogeny, that family tree. What we see is that all these lizards have evolved fairly recently. Okay. In evolutionary terms, they are very young species. Okay. They just evolved like between 10 to 18 million years ago. I know million sounds like a long time, but in the evolutionary time scale, it's fairly young. So they are closely related. They have evolved very recently. They have separated from each other very recently, and they are still retaining very similar behavior. So all Sitanas and all Saradas, these fan-throated lizards, use dewlap for signaling. They flag their dewlap in similar ways. Of course, there are differences in color and behavior and the size of dewlaps, but they all use very similar signaling strategy, which is flagging their dewlap. And where they are together, individuals of two different species fight with each other and try to mate with each other's females. Okay, this doesn't occur anywhere except where they overlap. So we were interested in seeing what effect do these interactions have on signal evolution. And we find this really nice spot. I'm just going to run you through the map. So this place, can you see the green polygon and the white polygon? So this place is actually, the white polygon is the tentative distribution of Sitana laticeps, which has the white dewlap. So for the next part, I'm going to refer to Sitana laticeps as the white lizard and Sitana darwina as the blue lizard. Okay. So the white polygon corresponds to the distribution of the white lizard. The blue polygon corresponds to the distribution of the blue lizard. Okay. Now, if you look at this inset, this is a close-up. What you see is that the blue lizard is typically found in the Western Ghats. Okay. The white lizard is found in some parts of Western Ghats, usually the foothills, but is more widely distributed on the Deccan Plateau. Okay. And there is this tiny area where you see the black star, where these two lizards come together. Okay. Which is actually very close to Kolhapur in a place called Kagal. Okay. So this is another zoomed in image of this area. So this part is where you have the blue lizards. This part is where you have the white lizards. And in this part, you have both. So what these pie charts show you is the relative densities of these two lizards. So what you have here is where you find only the blue. 8 kilometers away, you have a population where you find both of them, mostly blue, but you also find some white. And if you go around 12 kilometers north of it, you find only white ones. Okay. So we focused on these three areas and compared the behavior of blues in a population where they are found all by themselves, and then compared it to a population where blue is found with white, and then looked at behavior of the white and compared it to the behavior of whites when they are found together. So a population where they are found, when a lizard is found all by itself, is called an allopatric population, all by himself. A population where it's found with another species, like in this case, blue and white are found together, it's called the sympatric population of blue and white. And this, because white is found all by itself, it's called the allopatric population of white. So what we basically did was, because we wanted to see how interactions might affect evolution of sexual signals, we compared behavior of blues between their allopatric and sympatric population, and we looked at behavior of white across its allopatric and sympatric population. And by making these comparisons, we could test whether these interactions have any effect or not. Okay, so for this, we followed a methodology which was very similar to what we had used for predation, where we found males who were holding territories, both white and blue ones, and then introduced either blue males in their territory or white males in their territory. Okay, and then looked at how they respond. Once we are done with the male experiment, we did the same thing with females. We introduced females of the white guy in the blue guy's territory. Then we introduced the females of the blue guy in the blue guy's territory. And we did the same thing for the white guys. And we did this across all the three populations. So in total, just to make it simpler, we had 16 different combinations of trials, okay, across three different populations. And at each of them, we recorded, firstly, did they really respond or not? So when I introduced a blue male in a white male's territory, did the white male respond or not? Okay. If it did respond, how long did it respond? How intense was its display? Okay. So we got all this information about signaling, and then we also collected individuals and measured their dewlap size and color. Okay. Now, if these interactions between these two species, if they are really affecting signaling, we need to see differences between blue males, which are found all by themselves, and ones which are found with the white guy. And we need to see differences between white guys which are found all by themselves and white guys that are found with the blue guys. Okay, so I'm going to, in the next slide, quickly go through the results that we found. Okay, so what we found was, so this part, when I say Sitana laticeps, this is the behavior that we found in a place where they are found by themselves. This is the behavior of Sitana laticeps when they are found with Darwini. Okay, this is the population behavior of blue guys when they are found all by themselves, and this is the behavior of blue guys when they are found with the white guys. Okay, so it's a comparison between the same species but across two different populations. Okay, population where they are found by themselves, and population where they are found with the other species. Okay, so what did we find? So when we looked at how intense were their displays, we found that when the white guys were found with the blue guys, their rate was lower. Okay, but we found no difference in the blue guys. Okay, so the blue guys were displaying as intensely uh, when they were alone as they were when the white guys. But the white guys reduced their intensity when they were with the blue guys. Okay. Similarly, dewlap size. The size of the dewlaps of individuals that were with the blue guys was smaller. Okay. But there was again no change in the blue guys. Frequency. By frequency, what I mean is when I introduce a male or a female, how often do I display to them? Okay. Do I display to them every time or do I display only few times? Okay. So by calculating this probability of display, we can see how eager are they to display. Okay. And what we found was with the blue guys, again, blue guys showed no change. Okay. They were as active, they displayed as intensely, their dewlap sizes were the same, their color was the same between allopatric and sympatric population. For the white guy, again, they were less likely to respond to either males or females when they were with the blue guy. Okay. So overall, what I'm trying to tell you is when the white guy is alone, it is very active. It's displaying. It has a big dewlap. Okay. It displays intense. But when it starts living with the blue guy, it is reluctant to display. If it does display, it is very, very low grade display. It's not very intense. And secondly, the size of its dewlap is also small. Okay, so what you see is by being with another species, it is actually changing the way it performs its sexual signals. Okay, so the question is, why is this happening? Okay, and why is it happening only to the white guy and not the blue guy? Now for that, I need to give you a little bit of a background about the natural history. So what's happening here is the white and the blue guys are fighting with each other. Okay. And when they are fighting with each other, because the blue guy is much bigger than the white guy is likely losing the fight. Okay. So it is not really helpful for the white guy. And these fights are happening because they have very similar signals, because they can't figure out who's who. And they are trying to approach each other's females because the females look very similar. Okay. So how does one avoid a fight? Okay. You can avoid the fight firstly by signaling during a different time or not signaling at all. Okay. So what the white guy is deciding to do is rather than signal and attract the blue guy and have a fight with them, they are saying we'll not signal at all. Okay. So what we think the white guys are doing is they are actually completely giving away their signaling behavior that they would perform if they were alone when they are with the blue guy. With the blue guy, they decide we are not going to signal. And instead of signaling, we are going to start behaving like females. Okay. By behaving like females, they are actually not attracting any aggression from the blue guys. What we actually found was when we introduced a white guy's female to the blue guy in the blue guy's territory, instead of getting aggressive, they tried to court her and attract her. So what the white males are doing is are behaving like females so that they can not attract attention from the blue guy. And then they are sneaking around and trying to mate with their females. This is what we think. Okay. So I think with all these three things, I just want to revisit what we started this discussion with, which is my interest, which is trying to understand why different lizards look different and why they have different colors and different behaviors. And I hope I've managed to show you how these three things, first is preferences influence color, how predation influence the strategy, which is how if you're going to be aggressive or not, how intensely you're going to display, and how it influences the colors of the dewlap. So I hope that that's how predation influences the signal. And lastly, when you are together with another species, how does that interaction shape the sexual signals? Okay. Getting back, so I'm kind of like zooming out now. So I just showed you how one small group of lizards can be really, really cool model systems to address questions of how sexual signals evolve, why is there diversity, And broadly, why are animals colorful, right? And I've done that with just a small group of lizards. Think about how many different species of reptiles and amphibians we have in India. And imagine how awesome these reptiles and amphibians can be to answer so many other questions. Okay, so in many ways, we are sitting on a gold mine, and we have the opportunity to really ask awesome questions and understand some really nice fundamental principles in ecology, evolution, and behavior. And just to give you an example, what people are using reptiles and amphibians for is this. We have always thought about parental care, right? We are like parents taking care of their kids. How did it come to be? Why is it that some animals do it and other animals don't? Okay, people are now using poison dart frogs to actually study it, because poison dart frogs uh, actually show very interesting parental care, where they will carry the tadpoles on your back and move them from one water body to the other. And then they are looking at, and sometimes who is doing that parental care is changing. Sometimes the females do it, sometimes the males do it, sometimes both do it. So people are now using poison dart frogs to really understand how parental care has evolved. What determines if both parents have to do it? What determines if only males have to do it? What determines if females have to do it? Right? So these are very fundamental questions that also are relevant to us, right? And they are using frogs for that. Something more closely related to the medical field, which is people are looking at frog ear. Frog ears and human ears share many similarities. And by studying how frog ears evolve and how they function, you can actually get an idea of how human ear might be functioning. And this has been done by studying frog ears. You can actually get to a better understanding of how we can develop hearing aids, right? So here a reptile, amphibian can be used for studying more applied problems. Okay, I know snakes are extremely popular animals in India. Lots of people like catching snakes, but snakes have also been used to study evolution of mimicry, which is kind of related to what I am interested in, which is coloration. And this can help you understand why you see differences across populations. Why are some snakes black in one area and why are they blue in some or red in other? Is it something to do with mimicry, right? Mimicry is more closely related to anti-predator strategies, which is if you look like a poisonous snake, the predators will leave you, right? So people have used that for use snakes for studying something like this. And lastly, in an age of climate change, reptiles can also be an interesting system to study how temperature dependent sex determination is going to get influenced by global change, right? You know, many reptiles and amphibians, when they lay eggs, if the egg is going to turn out to be a male or a female, is determined by the environment, right? So by studying how reptile eggs are responding to it, you can actually get a better idea of how climate change is going to affect things, right? So the possibilities are endless. And in India, since we have this diversity, we can actually use this diversity to answer some of these questions in probably better ways than many other people, because we have that diversity. So I guess with that, I would just like to say that I showed you these bunch of experiments that we have done, which I find interesting, but it has definitely not been an individual effort. Most of this work was done in collaboration with my old boss, Maria, who is an associate professor in the Indian Institute of Science, and Harshal Bhosle, my colleague who now works in Bombay Natural History Society, and many, many different friends and volunteers who came and helped. So I guess it's just fair that I say that. Thank you to them all. Well, with that, I'm just going to say thank you for being here, and I'll be more than happy to answer questions.
It was a really wonderful session. We didn't know that there were so many details involved in the behavior of lapping their dewlap. It's just like we see images on Facebook and social media that these beautiful lizards are being photographed all over, but we never knew that there were so many things that are hiding behind the act itself.
Correct.
So guys, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box, or you can just unmute yourself and ask it. So while people are framing the question, I'd like to ask, how can a normal person or wildlife photographer who is interested in wildlife but have no background in it help in research like this?
Oh, there are many ways. I think one of the most spectacular data sets that I recently came across was eBirds, um, where photographers have just been very nice and kind, and they have been posting all their sightings online. And there's a small project that we are trying to do, me and a bunch of my friends. We are looking at bird photographs, and when you submit it to eBird, you get data on both the habitat, when it was photographed, and we are trying to correlate. So, like reptiles who have colors that they use for signaling, birds change into what is called the breeding plumage. So, we are trying to see the link between environmental conditions and bird plumage using data from eBirds, because we have an extremely data rich system there, where we have photographs of like what last I saw some 5 lakh cattle egrets, right? 5 lakh cattle egrets all across India, and we know the date, the time, the GPS location of all these sightings, and all we are trying to do is basically grade them as, are they in breeding plumage, they are not in breeding plumage, and then using GIS getting data of the local environmental conditions and trying to see how environment influences expression of sexual plumage. So the fact that people like you who are so good at photography, you can just contribute to these online forums, it becomes a data that other people can use to ask big questions.
Right. Okay, so guys, do you have any more questions? Oh, I don't think that they're going to ask. So my next question to you uh, is this study helpful in conservation of an individual species, or in a way that they can be conserved?
Yeah, the short answer to your question is, at least the 3 experiments that I showed you don't necessarily directly affect how you conserve animals. But for example, the wind turbine experiment, we used the fact that there were no predators there uh, to ask a question about signaling, but you can also ask questions about how that's affecting the population. Remember, I told you that when you have more numbers there because there is no predation, it's affecting the quality of individuals.
Right.
So individuals have a lower mass. Okay, they have poorer colors. It's affecting how they are interacting. These factors are definitely going to have consequences on long-term population dynamics, right? Because there is, every habitat has a carrying capacity, is how many individuals you can have in a certain habitat, and predation is one of the important factors that influences how animals are stay as in remain at that carrying capacity. If you remove that, you're likely going to have a population explosion, and we are facing effects of population explosion in humans. Similar things can happen even in animals, right? If you have too many of them, it's going to affect the quality of the population. So in that way, whatever you study regarding their basic biology can be used for conservation. Okay, but if you ask me directly, maybe not.
Okay. So as you mentioned that the color of dewlap is not when they are born, like they develop this color through their whatever they are feeding on. So is the diet different of 2 individual species, like you mentioned the white throated fan lizard? Like, is there any difference in the uh, prey of their, like, difference in their prey?
Okay, so when I said that the diet, so there are animals, usually when you look at animal colors, they can be broadly categorized in 2 different classes. One are called pigments, and other are called structural colors. Pigments are typically colors that animals cannot produce, and they have to express it based on what they eat. Structural colors, on the other hand, animals can produce by themselves. Right? So there are a couple of examples. For example, the black on the dewlap of the tricolored lizard is a melanin based, and animals can produce their own melanin. Of course, it depends on what they are feeding, but it doesn't necessarily depend on what exactly they are feeding. It takes energy to produce it, but the energy doesn't necessarily have to come from a certain source. Blue is a structural color. Most animals cannot produce blues. It depends. So they produce blues by producing scales which are of a certain structure at the nanoscale level. And that structure preferentially reflects light. And that's why it looks blue. Orange, on the other hand, is purely diet based. It belongs to a category of pigments called carotenoids and terrenes.
Okay.
These are found in insects, and the insects that these lizards eat allow them to get these carotenoids and terrenes and then express them in the dewlap. So as far as the white one is concerned, at least in the place where they occur together, the blue and the white, we have seen them eat the same thing. Okay. So I'm not necessarily sure if it's diet based. Can it be diet based somewhere? Yes, it can be.
Okay.
I have a question.
Yes.
Regarding your study in which you compared where the two habitats collided between the blue ones and the white ones.
Correct.
So, considering that there were no visuals, it was all in an open space. So, in that space, due to the camouflage of the white one, was what we can say the population density of the white ones larger than the blue ones because they don't exhibit very vibrant colors.
So actually, if you, I think, so if you, I put the pie charts there, no? So actually, in the place where they occurred together, the white ones were lower in number than the blue ones, relatively. Now, there is also one very interesting thing that you need to know. Just because we think that they are not bright doesn't mean that they are not bright. And I'll give you an example. The white ones actually have scales which reflect ultraviolet light. And lizards, unlike humans, actually have an extra photoreceptor in their eye that allows them to see in UV. So while these lizards look white to us, they actually may not look white to other lizards.
Yeah.
So looking at just color and predation pressure just by the way we perceive color may not always be a great idea because animals have very different visual systems. Okay, we have only 3 photoreceptors, which we very commonly call RGB ones, which are sensitive to red wavelength, green wavelength, and blue wavelength. Many animals have many different photoreceptors. Like one of the other butterflies that I work on has 6 photoreceptors. Okay, so they might actually be better at perceiving slight differences in shades of color than humans are. Okay, butterflies also have an ultraviolet receptor. Okay, so they can actually see in UV that we can't. Most mammals can't, but birds can. So
Okay, yeah.
So to kind of answer your question, why is their density higher? Firstly, it's not higher, and just because they look white to us, does that mean they're going to have lower predation? I am not quite sure, but I don't have data to prove that.
Okay.
Okay, cool. So does anyone else have any more questions? If no, then we can conclude the session for today. We will wait for 1 more minute. Okay, so I think there's no question. Okay, so once more, thank you so much for attending this session, and thank you so much, Amod, for conducting this session. It was really very interesting to know how these behaviors are existing in nature.
Cool. Thank you so much. Well, like I said, thank you all for coming on a Sunday.
Okay, so we'll conclude the session. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.